Hi, this is Mike from Intri.de. Here I'm going to show you a breakdown on how this image and the animation was made. All started with the basic shape, basic text, which I changed a little bit. On top of that I added a spline chamfer, which you can also make a bit rounder if you like to. On top of that I added an edit spline. Went to subject spline, select everything and use the outline to create the additional shape, something like that. That one, and now go in there and delete everything that looks weird. Like those over here. Then I've got two over here. And maybe stuff that's kind of like going underneath here. Let's delete that. Maybe select this one, duplicate it up, to then delete this. Over here you can use the spline and extend. Since there's a spline over here, they'll just go until they hit something. If there's nothing, just create a spline and delete it after you don't need it anymore. Cut them in shape and back to segment, deleting them again. So that's basically the shape how it was made. So let's get rid of that one and restore the one I had. And on top of that I made a renderable spline. I chose this instead of the sweep because now it's still more or less a spline and I can use a path deform on top of that. But for now I'll turn it off just to make it not as confusing. Then we need an object which will go along the path. So I'll take a cylinder, something like that, a bit longer, something like that. Be sure to have enough segments, and 8 sides should be enough. So that one's going to get the path deform. Important, take the object space path deform and not the patch deform. Choose the path. And now you have the object running around the shape. It still goes off in the beginning, and the same goes for the end, which then just leaves. You can change that if you go down here, turn on the loop back, and now it just continues to stay on the shape. So let's turn on auto key. Go to some frame, animate up to 100, turn off auto key, and we now have the animation from here to here. It then stops. So we'll go into the curve editor. In modified object, in my case it's already expanded because in the right click I allowed to also auto expand the modifiers. Then zoom to everything, select all the keys, make them straight, edit, controller, out of range types, and you can go either for the circle or the relative repeat, since the end is also the beginning. And you see that line is now continuously, and it will continue doing its stuff. Since we're doing in steps of 100, it's always loopable, or in steps of 200, so that should be okay. Now we still have another problem. You see the stretching over here. Let me go to another frame. That is because the object goes from one shape onto the next shape, and therefore it's being stretched somewhere in between. So what I'm doing now, I'll add a data channel modifier, because in here we have a nice preset tension deform. I'll load that, which will look for any change of shape. I don't want to have the vertex output, I'd like to have a face output. So I'll add a face output. Everything turns red because vertex output and face output doesn't work. Delete that, still red because we got vertex coming in, face coming out. So I'll choose a convert to subobject type and be sure to set that to face. Now, of course, we need to find the rest pose. So let's go for the path deform, turn that off, go to the tension deform, tell them to capture the momentary rest pose, like that. And if I'll now turn on that one, this stretched part will be selected because we have the face output as a selection, and we're going to replace the current selection. So on top of that, I'll choose a material modifier and change that to 2. So we can now go for the material editor, create a physical material, change the emission to some color, and plug that into a multi-sub material in slot 1. Make that smaller, and we'll take another material which we're going to put into slot 2. Let's clean that up a little bit. Only need 2, and assign that to the object. So we're not going to be distracted by the selection. I put a poly select on top of it, and now we can see the 2 different colors in here, the glowing part and the gray part. If I now change these color to 100% transparency, we can still see it, also because it's shiny. But even if I crank up the roughness, it's still somewhere to be seen. So the solution for that is go for the cutout slot. I'm going to choose an OSL value, color value. I'm going to change that color to black. And that will now completely make that transparent. To add some more of those, I'll just use these 2 materials and I'll duplicate them and change the color to something different, like an orangey tone. Select all of those, duplicate again, change to maybe red. The one down here maybe to green or something like that. Okay, so these I'm going to use for the additional objects. If I now reselect that again, turn off the path deform, move, make a duplicate of that one, make sure to make a copy, not an instance. I'll assign the new material to that, and I'm going to change the original object. So size lower, less height segments because we don't need that many. On top of that, I'm going to use the clone MCG. On scriptspot.com you'll find a lot of cloners done with MCG, and I don't want to have the clones in X. I'd like to have some more in the set offset, something like that, and everything else is already done. An important part that I missed before is, as we're working with a cylinder, this automatically has material IDs, so we need to change that to a material 1, and the same of course over here, down there, material 1. So everything will be 1, not just the selected parts. Important on that one is, in the data channel, we need to recapture the current pose because it's a different geometry. And now we can turn on the path deform and everything goes along. To make everything look cool in here, I'll just deselect everything. I'll go to my preview presets and I'll just turn on the plume, and I can change the radius and everything in here. I can change the strength if I want to. Of course, those two, let's first enable the path deform on that one. Of course, they're at the moment at the same position. So I'll just go into the curve editor, select everything, start moving it. If you hold Control, you move in only one direction. If you turn on interactive update, you can already see what's happening in there and therefore position it. Just take that object, duplicate it again, and just keep on doing that process until everything looks nice and is filled up. For the rendering, there are two options. You can go for create preview animation, or capture still image. In there, just use the default settings, that is fine. User defined, where is it? Here we go, user defined, which will then capture all that. It's important that you turn on shapes, because even though we have a renderable spline on top of that one, it's still kind of considered as shape and therefore will not display. And then just create the rendering. The other option is, let me just turn that on. If we're going for rendering, and in this case we have the Quicksilver renderer in Mac since quite a while. And the cool thing on the Quicksilver, it now also has the options of enabling the plume, which then of course will render a very quick image of that one. In my case, I just duplicated those multiple times. I have like 80 cylinders in mind. Always do a little bit of an offset, and that is everything you have to do to create a picture like that and an animation. Here the original file, which I also stretched to 400 to make everything a bit slower. And as you can see, I have like tons of cylinders in there moving. And if you select more of them and look into the curve editor, you'll see that's a big mess over here. But since they're all going like from 0 to 100 or 200, which doesn't really matter because 200 is also 100, everything else is in a lot of action and movement.